In its quest to provide an open forum for discussion of controversial issues, this station allows hosts and their guests to express themselves without any significant censorship. You're advised that any views expressed by the hosts or their guests are not necessarily the views of Togi Entertainment or its partners.
Motherhood Incorporated proudly presents Military Mom Talk Radio live on TogiNet.com. Co-hosted by Robin Boyd and Sandra Beck, the owner of Motherhood Incorporated. Military Mom Talk Radio is here with a powerful platform for women to discuss their ideas, issues, and concerns with respect to the military lifestyle. Military Mom Talk Radio encourages you to share your experiences of being a military wife and mother. This show is dedicated to educating your family about the many resources that are available in both the public and private sector, and we'll be sharing helpful information from women all over the world. We'll cover everything military, from helping a family member cope with post-traumatic stress disorder, to navigating government programs dealing with family issues, to the struggles of deployment, along with being a working mother both in and out of the home. This is Military Mom Talk Radio, and here are your hosts, Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd.
Hello, military moms. This is Robin Boyd with you today. I'm here for Sandra Beck. She's had a busy day with a conference and just doing some wonderful things out there. So we give you a salute, Sandra, telling you thanks for doing all the wonderful things that you're doing out there. Today is Authors Day, and I have got to say we have got three amazing authors. It's going to be very eclectic in that each author has such a different point of view, but all somewhat focusing on different periods of history, which is really fascinating. First, we're going to meet Barbara Dzikowski. She's the author of Searching for Lincoln's Ghost, and it takes place in the mid-'60s, and it's a lovely story, a little coming of age, but there's a little bit more to it, and we'll get into that with Barbara shortly. Our second author, Jo Epley, tells a very descriptive insight to the American Revolution in A Passel of Hate. Very, very in-depth book, and it's one that you really, really get into because it grips you right into your soul. And then we're going to round out the hour with a completely different perspective from Richelle Rodgers in Forever Growing, A Journey of Trust. And I think it's only apropos to have her on after we talk with Jo Epley, because what went on in the American Revolution, one would think had changed after a few decades, but maybe not quite as much as we would like as a society to have seen those changes. So we're going to talk to Richelle about some of the challenges that life has given her and how she has worked through them and has conquered. We're really looking forward to meeting Richelle on those points. And to welcome all of these wonderful guests with me today, I have our veteran correspondent, Steve Boyd, joining me. Hello, Steve.
Hello, I'm here.
Well, we have really been sharing these books. I have to say, each book has 2 bookmarks in it because we have just been thoroughly enjoying reading today's guests' books, and it's really been fascinating. And I know, Steve, you've had your nose right in the midst of this, the second one. We're really looking forward to having you chat with Jo Epley about that. One of the things that made me ponder, though, Steve, is that we've been looking at different views of our society and history from 3 very unique perspectives. And it really gave me pause to think of how much you enjoy history. And I can only imagine that your love of history has come from growing up in Lexington, Massachusetts, and experiencing the reenactments on the Lexington Green every April 19th, which is right around the corner.
Yeah, that was when we were younger, especially in elementary school. We never realized the United States had been in any other wars but the Revolutionary War. We grew up with it. We were indoctrinated with it. We did the tours. It was something that was always there. It was always present.
Did you find that it was it was just almost tradition, you had to be involved in it, or did you personally feel compelled to learn more about what the significance was in our country's history because of this, of where you were growing up?
I think that had a lot to do with it. I think anybody that grows up in an area that has a lot of history, especially early United States history, is just fascinated by it. And like I say, it's one of those things that's indoctrinated into our lifestyle because everything we saw and did, even as kids, would be walking down the street and there'd be tourists all over the place, as most people know, with battlefield sites, as it were, that they were constantly asking us questions, or if they were reading something, one of us would always interject, usually in a crowd of 10-year-old kids walking, that's wrong. This is the way it really happened.
And that's really kind of funny. You became all little tour guides the whole...
Absolutely. We were all experts in it.
Sure.
We'd, at an early age, we'd go around to all the historical buildings from Buckman Tavern and Monroe Tavern and all the other houses, and then we'd do field trips over to Concord, where the British marched after they kind of decimated the Lexington Minutemen. And we'd ride our bikes all over the place to all these places. And back in those days, it wasn't a federal park the way it is today. So we just knew everything that was there because not only that, but the ancestors, the kids that we hung around with, some of their ancestors were actually on the green during the battle.
Sure. Right. That gave it a whole more personal viewpoint.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you think that, and of course, we all know that tactical views of history are a lot more, or tactile, I should say, not tactical, that's the wrong word. Views of history are going to be more impressive. But do you feel that you had a good feeling as far as the especially knowing ancestors, the families and what their parts in history were, as opposed to this was what was happening to the government? This was the initiative of the government. There's a lot more that goes on to a war than just one government arguing with another government.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things, one of the historical sites is called the Hancock Clark House, which was literally 3 doors down from where the house I grew up in. And knowing the history behind that, would walk by and say, "Hey, John. Hey, Sam. How you doing?" Because that's where the two men were hiding during the initial battle. And I don't say hiding is in that they were cowards. They were the leaders, a couple of the leaders of the country, so they had to stay protected.
Well, sure, it was a strategic move. It was necessary.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. But we'd learn everything, and then we'd go into Boston and see. We had the run of Boston back in the late 50s, early 60s, when a kid could still go in town and still walk around where Washington and all the greats hung around.
And I really think it's wonderful that more schools, in fact, I'm trying to think who it was, whether it was our little friend Tiffany or who it was that we were recently talking with, that more schools are embracing their students to do projects where they're reenacting parts in history. And I think it just is so important for our young people, because the more we talk with a lot of the authors that we've met through the Military Writers Society of America, it's so important for every generation to write, to document, to journal, to express the things that they have experienced, because how is the next generation going to know? And I think these efforts are wonderful. And of course, the reenactment on the Lexington Green every April is phenomenal. And your brother was one of the Minutemen, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. I was asked to join the Minutemen too, and I said, "Well, this is a little too much, too much stick for me." But he's enjoyed it.
It is a lot, though, isn't it, Steve?
Oh yes, yeah, and I remember my mother's a seamstress, so she was making my brother's Continental Army costume when we were growing up. So that was a big deal too. And these reenactors, whether it be Revolutionary, Civil War, or whatever, I mean, they get into it. It has to be exact when they make their costumes and get their equipment down.
And the actual enactment of it, because they have to portray who those people were, what they did, where they fell, who they cried out to.
Absolutely. It's right down based on factual documentation of, for example, a man named Harrington whose house was right on the common, crawled over and died at his wife's feet, and the house is still there. So that's the type of thing. And when I was in college, I had to, for an American history course, I had to write a paper about it, and did a lot of the research out of the Lexington Library that had all the original documents from the people of the period.
That's really neat. I know in my college we had a wonderful Lincoln library, which has since been sold, but Endicott College in Beverly at one time had a beautiful Lincoln library, and there were so many artifacts for us to appreciate. It was only open once in a while. It was not open to the public all the time because they were trying to protect these documents, and it's since been sold, and I'm not sure where, but as you know, Steve, just having the ability to see some of these things, to be able to experience reading the actual documents, it's really breathtaking.
Oh, sure. And one of the things that the Minutemen still carry onto the Common during the reenactment on April 19th is one of the original muskets used by the Minutemen on that green in 1775.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So fascinating. We've just begun our hour, Steve, and we've got three wonderful people that we're going to welcome. And the first, speaking of Lincoln, the first guest, Barbara Dzikowski, is going to share with us a story that she has written about Lincoln. Is a very important part of this story, and this little girl that she writes of is going to do what she can for a very specific reason to find Lincoln's ghost. We're here today on Military Mom Talk Radio. You're listening to us, Robin Boyd and Stephen Boyd, with you this hour, and we'll be right back in just a few minutes with Barbara Dzikowski.
Are you a military mom looking for help in dealing with the system? Keeping the home fires burning? Well, that's what we're here for. It's Military Mom Talk Radio with Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd. And we'll be right back after these.
Are you fascinated by the stories behind the stories? The people behind their masks? The truth about people's failures and redemptions in both their business and personal lives? Then Off the Record Secrets of with host Judy Schreiner is for you. It's people's secrets that make them interesting, but very few folks are willing to reveal them unless they trust that their information will be treated with accuracy, fairness, and respect. People have been entrusting their secrets to longtime business journalist Judy Schreiner for the last 25 years, and now she's bringing her expertise and impressive contact list to Rockstar Radio Network. Tune in and call in as host Judy Schreiner talks to guests off the record as they reveal new secrets each Tuesday at noon Eastern, 11 a.m. Central.
Get ready to learn and play with Mrs. A, your host, Barbara Allison, Mondays at 11 a.m. Central on the Rockstar Radio Network. Did you know that kids are only 20% of the population, but they are 100% of the future? How are you preparing your child for that future? The years between the ages of 0 and 6 are crucial for learning and development. Barbara Allison is a teacher, parent, and author on supporting children's early learning. Learning starts even before a child is born, and parents are children's first teacher. Join Mrs. A for ideas, tips, and suggestions for fun learning and play activities as she helps you support your child. Starting early is starting Starting Smart. For more on Mrs. A, her books, the show, and her blog, check out her website, 123kindergarten.com. Then, come learn and play with Mrs. A with your host, Barbara Allison, Mondays at 11 a.m. Central on the Rockstar Radio Network.
We'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way. Hey, Uncle Sam, put your name at the top of his list, and the Statue of Liberty started shaking.
Welcome back to Military Mom Talk Radio on TogiNet.com. Covering topics to help on the home front with help from those who know how the system works and how to work the system. It's more fun than a sale at the BX. Now let's get back to it. It's Military Mom Talk Radio. Here again are your hosts, Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd.
Red, white, and blue.
Welcome back, Military Moms. This is Robin Boyd with you today, and Stephen Boyd joining me, our veteran correspondent. Today is Author Day, and our first author, Barbara Dzikowski, is an author. This is her debut book, as a matter of fact. And Searching for Lincoln's Ghost offers an authentic look at a coming-of-age story during the tumultuous 1960s. Been there, done that. I want to say welcome, Barbara, to Military Mom Talk Radio. Do we have Barbara?
Yes.
There you are.
Here,
Hi,
can you hear
Barbara.
me now? Yes.
Now I can.
Good.
Welcome. You're calling us from Indiana, is that correct?
South Bend, Indiana, the home of Notre Dame.
Oh, wow. Well, we'll give a good route to Indiana for that. That's great. What brought you to writing after all of the other endeavors that you had done in life? Somewhere was a story just itching to come out.
Well, that's absolutely true. In his essays, the great writer Emerson wrote, "Always do what you are afraid to do." And this was one of the major themes of Searching for Lincoln's Ghost. As you said, it's a coming-of-age story. It's a historical novel about growing up in the mid-'60s when the country was still largely segregated. And change, as you know, is often the breeding ground for our deepest fears. Our fears cripple us in so many ways. It's the catalyst for all forms of abuse and oppression and intolerance. And so Searching for Lincoln's Ghost, it begins as a look back from an adult's perspective, but at its heart it's a story about a young, lonely girl who's also dealing with great fear and change in her life.
And her fear is one probably beginning of vulnerability, which we all experience in one way, shape, or form. But her vulnerability was certainly one that no one would hope a little girl would have to face.
Absolutely. She's lost both her parents in a car accident, and she's being raised by a grandmother who's still deeply grieving over the loss of her own daughter. And so her grandmother is largely obsessed with death. And so Andy, although she's only 11 years old, she grows up thinking a lot about death. And she harbors a lot of fears and anxiety about dying and wondering what's happened to her parents. So she's on a mission to discover if there really is such a thing as life after death by going on a ghost hunt for Abraham Lincoln's ghost, which purportedly haunts her school's auditorium.
Now, why Abraham Lincoln? What was the significance of you utilizing this person in history as opposed to maybe any other? It could have been George Washington. It could have been Benjamin.
You're absolutely... Well, studying the life of Lincoln is a part of every American childhood. And it captivated my own childhood at the age of 11. So that was kind of, my own experience. And also that Lincoln is this iconic hero that most everyone can relate to. He's kind of our collective moral compass, if you will. And So, he's just that iconic hero that we can all identify with. And the other thing about it is when I was wanting to write a tale about this particular age group and this particular time in history, I stumbled across all this wonderful Lincoln folklore that I had not been aware of. And I felt that I read more about Lincoln than the average person, and I really found a lot of great stuff out there, and chief of which was a lot of great folklore about how Lincoln's ghost haunts the White House still. If you go on the White House website, you'll read about Lincoln's ghost. It's one of those things. He supposedly haunts the tomb in Springfield. There's a lot of charming legends out there about Lincoln's ghost, and ghost stories are a part of childhood. So it seemed a really good hook to share those intriguing pieces of history and some of the imagination that people have of seeing Lincoln's ghost with tying it into a story about this age.
Did you expect this to be a young people's book, or were you really looking for the adults, say even in my generation and Steve's generation, that are kind of looking back to a more innocent era?
Well, that's a great question. It's a young adult book, and I really, I want to emphasize, although the book covers many issues, it's a short book. It's a fast read, but it's got a lot of substantive issues that it covered. And what really inspired me to write it was the horrible lack of empathy and tolerance we're seeing in so many of today's headlines. Things like bullying, which is, so much in the forefront now, child abuse, and I think the period of life from age 11 to 14 is one of the most pivotal times in our character development, really shaping the kind of adults that we become. And so I think it's a wonderful perspective to examine hard social issues and human nature through the painfully honest and impressionable lens of childhood. And I wanted to use that period of life to explore the motivations of why do people hurt other people? How do we first learn fear and prejudice? And also to examine the power of empathy that we all possess to make a positive difference. I've had a lot of adult readers. I meant it as, and this was a group that even grandparents could read with young readers because the boomer generation are, now at the age where we have, grandchildren that are of age to read this.
Sure. And it is a little exposing of some very delicate topics. For example, you did choose to bring up sex abuse issues. Was that something you felt was needed to complete the story? Or did you go ahead? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think, I think of all the crimes that we're looking at when we're looking at bullying and prejudice and all these other issues, I think that child sex abuse, particularly by clergy, is one of the most horrific crimes of all. And I really wanted to, that was kind of the kingpin issue that I wanted to center the story around. I mean, the 60s was a time when it was even expression, children are seen, but they're not heard. And this was the time when many of these type of crimes were being perpetrated, but certainly it didn't come to the forefront till even 20 years later. But, no one is entrusted with a more sacred, intimate trust than our holy people. And they are the ultimate mentor, so they can become ultimately the ultimate betrayer. And so I really wanted to just kind of relate the issues of the past, the hate issues. We were right in the middle of changing things with segregation, and tie some of those same type of issues in the past with some of the things we're dealing with today.
One of the things that I also was wondering, because the abuse was focused on this boy that your protagonist is really smitten with, I think the boy was vulnerable in his own way because he was not believed. His parents didn't believe him. The church didn't believe him. And that vulnerability made him very alone person.
Absolutely. When adults don't believe or listen to children, and again, that happens to many children, especially back in that era of life, I think. It just, the cascade of complications and pain is that much deeper. I mean, many times we think kids are resilient, and we say that all the time. We always say kids are resilient, but kids aren't resilient. They just learn how to stuff their pain, I think, deeper, and it's something that they carry with them. Again, if you look at the bullying issue, there's so much on that nowadays, and many adults who were bullied as children can still recall what the person looked like, where they were when this happened. This is not something, it changes us, and kids just know how to stuff it in a deeper place.
Yeah.
Did any other authors influence you when writing this book, Barbara?
Well, I think the major author that influenced me, I would have to say, was Harper Lee's classic To Kill a Mockingbird. She, that book had an enormous influence on me, and I really wanted to try to write a story that was kind of similar in tone and style, a look back, but looking at a completely different era in our history.
Sure. What do you think is more important in fiction, great characters or a great plot?
I'm all about characters. I think, you can read great books, great exciting plots, but I don't know that those are the books that stick with you. I think the books that really stick with you are when we care about the characters and when we learn something about ourselves.
Sure.
And even if we don't change our beliefs, we reinforce then what we believe. We have more of a reason to believe the way we're believing. So I think those are the really great books when we care about the characters and we feel as if it's happening to us.
Right.
Barbara, where can we find your book? Because I'm sure that you have some goals for this book, and possibly you have more stories now that you've gotten this one launched. I hope that there's more to come.
Well, I'm actually almost finished, I should say, with hoping to publish later this year my second novel, which is also a novel about the 60s, mostly the cataclysmic year of 1968. But this one is definitely an adult story dealing with some of the social issues of that time. Including the era of Martin Luther King's assassination and Robert Kennedy's assassination. But basically, if readers are interested, they can find Searching for Lincoln's Ghost on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, a number of smaller bookstores. And certainly check out my website, which happens to be my name, so it's a difficult website. So if you just Google in Searching for Lincoln's Ghost, it will come up.
That's wonderful. Barbara Dzikowski, and thank you for helping me with the pronunciation. I wanted to make sure I did that correctly. We appreciate it so much. Thanks for coming.
Okay, thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Stay tuned. We'll meet Joe Epley right after the break.
Are you a military mom looking for help in dealing with the system? Keeping the home fires burning? Well, that's what we're here for. It's Military Mom Talk Radio with Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd. And we'll be right back after these.
Connect with Juliana and connect with what lies beneath. Friday afternoons at 4, 3 Central on TogiNet.com. Juliana is certified as a life coach who wants people to connect. Connect with what lies beneath, those truths and answers. And through her counseling practice, she has helped others find their personal power and fulfill their dreams. And she wants to do the same for you here on Connect with Juliana. Through intimate discussions, intriguing subject matters, and the expertise of her guests. For more on Juliana and her show, check out her website, connectwithjuliana.com. Juliana will cover it all. Nothing is off limits. She wants to know what matters to you. Make the connection. Tune in to TogiNet to connect with Juliana to find out the facts that could be hidden beneath the surface. Connect with Juliana on TogiNet to make a quality connection in your life. Friday afternoons at 4, 3 Central on TogiNet.com.
'Cause there ain't no doubt I love this land. God bless the USA.
Welcome back to Military Mom Talk Radio on TogiNet.com, covering topics to help on the home front with help from those who know how the system works and how to work the system. It's more fun than a sale at the BX. Now let's get back to it. It's Military Mom Talk Radio. Here again are your hosts, Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd.
Welcome back, Military Moms. This is Robin Boyd with you today, along with Steve Boyd, our veteran correspondent, joining me today as we have a wonderful chat with three very, very interesting authors. We just spoke with Barbara Dzikowski, and so that you know how to spell that, her last name is D as in Delta, Z as in zebra, Ikowski, Barbara J. Dzikowski. And I am so sorry, Barbara. I'm trying really hard. She did say search for Lincoln's Ghost. Searching for Lincoln's Ghost is the best way to find it. And if you go to Google, you can search that title and you will find her. Coming up now, we have Jo Epley. After a career that included the Army's elite Green Berets, television journalism, and a successful global public relations practice, Jo Epley retired in 2005 to the North Carolina mountains, and a new career of writing historical novels began. Thank you for joining us. Welcome, Jo.
Welcome, Jo. It's a delight to be here.
Wonderful to have you. Well, you have certainly started out with something that did not appear to be a historic novel background, and you certainly hit the ground running when you put pen to paper and developed a Passel of Hate. Was this brewing in you for a long time, or was the American Revolutionary War something that was close to your heart?
Well, it's always been close to my heart. I was born and raised here in western North Carolina, not too far from where the Battle of Kings Mountain and the Battle of Cowpens were fought. And since I was a kid, I walked those battlefields. But it was only after I retired that I really started getting into more than just the surface stories about those two battles, and particularly about the people who fought there. You know, the Battle of Kings Mountain in particular was more of a family affair. There, in the 2,000 participants, there were 42 sets of brothers, 18 father-son sets, a whole slew of uncles, cousins, nephews, and not all of them fighting on the same side. When I read about 4 Goforth brothers whose bodies were found on the battlefield, I found out that 3 of them were Tories and 1 was a Whig. And it set me to thinking, how did people live? How did families cope with family members having different political viewpoints to the point that they would be fighting each other? And so I started writing from that perspective.
Jo, how widespread was the independence movement in the Carolinas? In your book, it tells about the plantations being sparsely spread out there. It wasn't a big popular uprising, as most revolutions are not. You had, I think, even John Adams, who said that there was about a one-third split. You know, 1/3 for independence, 1/3 for the king, and a third. Just leave me alone.
Sure.
Here in the Western Carolinas, I think it was more like a 20-20-60 split. With the majority just wanting to be left alone. You know, this was a very remote area. We were at the edge of the wilderness where I'm living right now, and so the revolution really it came in bits and spurses of Tory groups and Whig groups fighting each other until the British invaded South Carolina in 1780, and then in the latter part of the summer they got up that pretty much took control of all of South Carolina. And a fellow by the name of Patrick Ferguson, who was a British officer in charge of the militia and provincial forces, he would be pretty similar mission to what today's Green Berets mission is in working with indigenous forces.
Of course.
And when he came up into the West, suddenly people started taking sides more seriously. People also would swap sides. You never knew who
which side they were on sometimes.
Viet Cong.
And there were a lot of folks who, just as you're having in Afghanistan today, who uses the war as an excuse for plundering and burning houses and getting retributions, family revenge, and things of that nature. All of that took place at that time. But people got tired once they became on their doorsteps. Then they buckled down and started fighting with more seriousness. And
sure.
And I had a lot of concerns about how, first, at the Battle of Kings Mountain, how did a force particularly with a cadre of professional soldiers of about 1/10 of Ferguson's forces. Ferguson, by the way, was the only British officer in that battle. How did they let themselves get defeated by a group of militia forces, and many of them who hadn't been fighting together? They didn't even know where the Loyalists were located until about a couple of hours before the battle. They had no time to reconnoiter the battlefield, and yet they surrounded this little hilltop and destroyed the enemy in less than a 1 hour firefight. It was very interesting in taking what you know about military science today and trying to apply that to how these different groups work and into the personalities of the commanders. That in itself was a totally different story. But it tried to weave all these stories in there. The story with the one fictional family I put into the story was one who was split with three brothers fighting for the king, two fighting on the Whig side for independence, and following the whole development of the Kings Mountain campaign through the eyes of one of those brothers.
Sure.
And that's sort of how it sort of evolved and came to a conclusion.
Sure. What impact did the battle have on the outcome of the war itself? It looked like such a small battle, but was it significant?
It was a very significant battle. Thomas Jefferson said that it was the tide in the turn of success. The turn in the tide of success for our independence. Up until that time, the British had complete victories. They had taken South Carolina. They had annihilated the Southern Army in Charleston, and when they captured the city of Charleston, the new army was put together under General Gates. They came down. They met at Camden. The Cornwallis wiped them out, suffered a humiliating defeat against Gates. In fact, he left the battlefield running ahead of his troops.
Yeah.
He didn't stop until he got to upper North Carolina.
Right.
But what it did is it gave confidence to the militia that, one, they could stand up and fight. It gave confidence. It made the Tory people who had Tory leanings think twice before joining the Tory forces. And then this was followed just a few months later at Cowpens when some colonials came on down south, and then they and militia under Daniel Morgan met Bannister Tarleton at Cowpens, and for the first time a predominant militia force from the Whig side defeated a regular British soldiers because there were very few Tory militia in Cowpens.
Sure, that was significant.
It was a very significant battle, and then they continued on, and so Kings Mountain really was that turning point. Otherwise, Cornwallis would have forced Cornwallis, who had already invaded Charlotte, North Carolina, to retreat back south to regroup himself, because with the loss at Kings Mountain, he lost about a fourth of his invasion force. Ferguson's job was to do two things. One was to quell the rebellion in the west, and two was to provide the western flank security for his main force army.
Sure. Why is the Battle of Kings Mountain called the family affair?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it's because you had so many brothers and father-son groups fighting there.
Sure.
You had 3 Evanston brothers from Virginia were killed there. In my own family, I didn't know this even after I read the book, that it was on my mother's side of the family with 5 Camp brothers. 2 of them were Tories, 3 of them were were Whigs, and yet none of them. They all got through the battle. Didn't get hurt, and the family legend goes is that after the battle, as they were marching over 600 prisoners westward, they decided they would hang a bunch of those who they figured to be committed criminal offenses. They actually did hang 9 men, including the commander of the Tory forces, but the Independence Liberty men. And that's what they called themselves really in those days, went to their commanders and said, look, we want to take our wayward brothers home with them. We don't want them to get hung. We don't like what they did, but you let us take them home and we'll lock them up in an outbuilding for the remainder of the war.
Sure.
And that they did that.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was just some of the strange things that went on there. In that, and then how one guy was captured just before the Battle of Kings Mountain, a little skirmish called Cane Creek. They captured 17 rebels, took them back, and then the wife of one of the captains, the wife of Aaron Deviney, came into Ferguson's camp and begging for release of her husband. And she was, had a little suckling baby, and she would crying and screeching, and they were trying to get rid of her. And Ferguson knew that he couldn't beat her or run her out of the camp because then it would turn those people who he thought would be neutral back against him. Because keep in mind, even then, Cornwallis had used the phrase "win hearts and minds."
Sure.
And so eventually, what he did was after hearing her cry for so long he couldn't hear himself think, he really paroled Aaron Deviney to his wife and to their children. And Deviney, as did most people in that era, honored the parole. And once they gave their word, they kept their word.
Right.
So he never picked up arms against the Brits again. However, he did go and serve on the Indian line in one of the Indian forts. That released one of the men there to go fight the British.
Right.
Wow. Joe, I have to say one of the things that was so striking to me about this book was your ability to take this down to such a personal level, because every character, the story was through each character, as opposed to us knowing what probably was happening as two governments were clashing. We were looking at all of this through the eyes of each person. We do have to wrap up the segment, but before we go, Joe, I do want to make sure that everybody knows where they can find A Passel of Hate.
Of course, it's available at Amazon. It's available both in print and on Kindle. It's also available on Barnes & Noble. Bookstores can order it. This is a self-published book, print on demand. Or they can go to my website at www.epleyrights.com for additional information.
That's wonderful. Joe Epley, thank you so much for joining us.
All right, thanks.
Great book.
Thank you.
Are you a military mom looking for help in dealing with the system? Keeping the home fires burning? Well, that's what we're here for. It's Military Mom Talk Radio with Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd. And we'll be right back after these.
Information about book publishing is power. The power to change your authoring life. And the power to change the lives of your readers. So join us for Your Guide to Book Publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. With your host, Dr. Judith Briles. Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific on the Rockstar Radio Network. You'll hear about statistics, scenarios, and strategies on what to do now. As the book shepherd, Dr. Judith Briles is in. And each week, she will include publishing professionals that will reveal tips and secrets to the author's journey. If there is a book in you want to listen, learn, and yes, call in with your questions each week. For more on Judith and what she can do for you, check out her website, thebookshepherd.com. It's your guide to book publishing. Everything you want to know but didn't know what to ask. Brought to you by Author You and the Book Shepherd with your host, Dr. Judith Briles. Thursday evenings at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific on the Rockstar Radio Network. Homeschooling? Have questions? Get your pen and paper ready. It's the sociable homeschooler, Vivian McNinney. Fridays at 5, 4 Central on TogiNet.com. After a handsome blue-eyed Texan fell in love with Vivian at the Victoria Station in London, she found herself at DFW Airport with a tiny suitcase and a snazzy little duffel bag. Well, 25 years later, she is now happily married to that blue-eyed cowboy. They have 4 grown children ages 24 to 18 who became willing guinea pigs when she unwittingly stumbled upon the world of homeschooling. Wildflower Academy flourished for 15 years. They survived and thrived, and you can too. Vivian will be covering a wide range of issues that face homeschoolers. What do you do with kids in the summer? How to set up your one-room schoolhouse? How obedience is paramount? And what to do with those snakes? Plus, you'll be sharing ideas and insights that she gleaned from other homeschoolers. So join us for an engaging hour with the sociable homeschooler, Vivian McNinney. Friday afternoons at 5, 4 Central on TogiNet.com.
We'll put a boot in your ass. It's the American way. Hey, Uncle Sam, put your name at the top of his list, and a statue of liberty started shaking.
Welcome back to Military Mom Talk Radio on TogiNet.com. Covering topics to help on the home front with help from those who know how the system works and how to work the system. It's more fun than a sale at the BX. Now let's get back to it. It's Military Mom Talk Radio. Here again are your hosts, Sandra Beck and Robin Boyd.
Welcome back, Military Moms. This is Robin Boyd with you today, joined by our veteran correspondent, Steve Boyd. If you've missed any of this show, you're going to want to grab the podcast because this has been such a powerful show so far, and it's not over yet. First, we met Barbara Dzikowski. She was the author of Searching for Lincoln's Ghost. We just had a marvelous conversation with Joe Epley, who describes a lot of very, very tough situations in the American Revolution in A Passel of Hate. And coming up, we're going to meet Richelle Rodgers. If you've missed any of our show this time or any of our other shows, you're going to want to catch the podcasts right here on our TogiNet show page. You can also find all of our podcasts at militarymomtalkradio.com. We're on iTunes, and we know people are enjoying them because we are right up there. We're averaging, Stephen, I'd say we're about 40,000 a month at this point in time, downloads of our podcast. So we're really excited that so many people are tuning in and giving us such marvelous feedback. And because of that feedback, we're getting to meet so many more people. We're learning of more authors, and we love to find more people with so many interesting stories, like our next guest, Richelle Rodgers, who is a living testimony of how her faith has guided her to emerge victorious and will give a voice to those who are overwhelmed by despair and anger. You have had an incredible background, and it's given you an incredible voice for all of us to listen to, Richelle. Thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I know that this story has been a testimony. So is this an autobiographical story? Is this a something for us to pause and consider?
Basically, it's an inspirational autobiographical piece, which really outlines as far as taking over and coming out victorious as a result of going through some adverse situations in your life, such as poverty, domestic violence, and racism.
Both of our stories so far that we've heard today, one was a coming-of-age story from the 60s, and there were some racial issues that were very strong in that book. Of course, the American Revolution posed some very difficult times that our country was going through, some growing pains and some issues. What were some of the challenges that you, in this generation, had to face?
Well, let me, before going into the challenges, let me set the scenario for my childhood upbringing. I think that'll give you a clear picture. I grew up in a family with one sister. She was like 5 years older than myself. My mother was a God-fearing Christian woman who worked as a beautician, and my father was a deputy sheriff for the county of Philadelphia. By today's standard, one might say we were poor. However, my mother and father managed to provide us with the right things in life, such as we had dancing lessons, singing lessons, and were able to play musical instruments. So I never thought of ourselves as being poor, even though our parents worked very hard for their money. As far as the challenges, I would say the biggest challenge for me, and I'm sure for my sister as well, was the domestic violence. My mother and father fought a lot about other women in my father's life. My mom was like a little 4'11", and my dad was 6'1". However, my mother was a fighter and knew how to retaliate. When my father was bad, he would throw things because he knew his hands were dangerous, because he was a deputy sheriff, and he was also an expert in judo, okay? However, I only recall getting one spanking from him, so I made out pretty good, I figure.
Yes, you were the lucky one.
Right. But Dad was also a drinker and gambler, and had been known to blow a whole paycheck on gambling. Some nights he would not even come home. But however, to me, the tragic day was the day after Thanksgiving when he shot his mistress and then turned the gun on himself, taking both of their lives. I personally do not recall a lot about my childhood, and the other lady had mentioned earlier as far as children tend to put things deep inside, that's probably what I did, okay? However, I also focused on learning in school and greatly admired the nuns who taught me at St. Columbus Elementary School at the time. Another big challenge for me was racism, which was prevalent in the 1960s. I vividly remember the day when I was called the N-word from one of my female classmates, and I basically chalked that up to her ignorance at the time and ignored her, okay? And what really stands out for me in this area was when I attended a very prestigious high school in Philadelphia, and I was the only African-American in the school, and I graduated. Come again?
It was a parochial school?
Yes. Yes, and I graduated in the top 10 out of approximately 100 seniors at the time.
Wow.
However, I was never counseled about going to college and applying for scholarships. However, God was on my side, okay, because I applied late to Yale University and the St. Joseph's University and was accepted at both, but could only afford to attend St. Joe's with the school loan because I didn't believe in putting that responsibility on my mother after she's gone through all that she's gone through in life. Okay?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so God was in my life, and my total trust was in him, and I knew at that time I would get a very good education in spite of what had happened.
Sure.
So I guess to sum it up, I had the challenge of domestic violence, poverty, and racism growing up. However, I continued to keep my faith and unconditional trust in God. And he saw me through these obstacles and opened up other doors for me to accomplish my goals.
Now, how did the military fit in all of this? Was so many young people go into the military to escape what their home life was presenting them? Was that your reason?
No, actually, I went to high school in a convent. It was a convent high school in Reading, Pennsylvania, and that happened through I call it a spiritual epiphany before the Blessed Sacrament, because I was sitting there before the Blessed Sacrament, and something told me to go to the back of the church, and I picked up this Catholic newspaper advertising for aspirants at Mount St. Michael's High School, and I applied and was accepted. Okay, so I went to a convent high school for my freshman, sophomore, and junior year, and then they closed down the school after junior year, and then my last year is when I went to the school I had mentioned earlier, the prestigious one in Philadelphia. Okay, after I did that, I did attend St. Joe's for a semester. I made the dean's list and all that, but I didn't feel like an adult, and I was very concerned as far as, number one, getting my education. Number two, I would say, as far as learning a skill. And number three, traveling, okay? And those were three things that the military offered me at that time. So, yes, I was very excited about it. And it was really a big turn because, coming from a convent into the military, although people may think they're so different, there's a lot of commonalities there. You get good discipline and dedication, and I would say entering the convent and joining the military provided me with great discipline and self-confidence.
Sure.
And it also taught me to be accountable for myself.
And do you feel that all of this was because of your religion that you were able to, or your belief in God, or because of all of what you have experienced, whether it be personally or through the military, was what drew you closer to God?
Well, I think being in a convent high school definitely brought me closer to God because we did everything like almost the nuns did, just about. So I had that spiritual connection, but I always felt that God was with me. I mean, even when I was in the military, I remember being in that bunker the first night and just crying. I said, oh, my God, what have I done with my life? But I tell you, joining the military was one of the best decisions of my life.
Where did you serve?
I served in 97th General Hospital in Frankfurt, West Germany.
Wow. Well, thank you for your service.
Okay.
Why did you pick the title Forever Growing, A Journey of Trust?
Well, I firmly believe that each day is a gift from God, okay? And it provides us with the opportunity to, I think, continue to grow in our faith and our trust regardless of our age. That is offering, I feel, us a new and exciting beginnings. Hence, we are forever growing in our journey of trust with God, one day at a time, one moment at a time. That's it.
That's beautiful. I think so many times we do need a book like yours to pull us back, to get us to refocus, because so many times I think life takes us rather than us taking on the challenges that we're facing. And I think being able to sit down with a book like yours is just a wonderful opportunity for us to regroup and find the thing in our inner hearts that are most important.
Right.
Richelle, we're going to need to close the segment, but I want people to know where to find your book. Where can we go?
Okay, it's available to order on my website at www.Richelle Rodgers, that's RichellRodgers.com.
Okay.
And it's also available at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Available in paperback as well as an ebook.
Well, it's a beautiful book. Richelle Rodgers, Forever Growing, A Journey of Trust. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Well, Steve, thanks for hanging in there with me today. It's been wonderful sharing this hour with you.
Hey, my pleasure.
You're going to want to stay with us next week because we have Mike Gardia. He is the author of Shadow Commander, the epic story of Donald Blackburn. He was a guerrilla leader and a special forces hero. We're also having Autumn Arnold back. She's our coach, our vitality coach. And we have Barbara Allen joining us, Unconventional Enemy. You're going to want to tune in for that. Thanks for joining us today on Military Mom Talk Radio. Have a great week, everyone.